My wife's hairdryer broke this morning. She's going to buy a new one. There'll be an owner's manual with a hairdryer. You get married, you get nothing.
Once he turned on ESPN, I'd lost him for the night.
I turned on the radio, was listening to one game on the radio, and watched another game on TV, and did that for 10 straight hours.
If there was a winner and a loser, he's watching it. It doesn't matter what the event is. This is a really important T-ball tournament.
Welcome to the Grace Marriage Podcast. I'm Brad Rhoads.
And I'm Marilyn Rhoads. We're here to help you build a marriage that's stronger, more connected, and full of grace.
I'm Rick Dayton, joining Brad and Marilyn as we bring you weekly conversations designed to inspire and equip you to live intentionally in your marriage.
We'll share practical tips, powerful stories, and strategies to help you and your spouse grow closer and thrive together.
So whether you're just starting out or have been married for years, there's always room to grow. Let's do this together. This is the Grace Marriage Podcast.
Grace Marriage Podcast, Episode 2 with Brad and Marilyn Rhoads. I'm Rick Dayton, and we're so glad that you are with us. In the first episode, if you missed it, go back and pull it up. And make sure that you subscribe, make sure you follow, be with us. All the things you do when you get your podcast, anything that you can do to make sure that that's marked, you're not going to miss a single episode. And it's really important that you walk along this with us as we learn more about how to love our spouses more, how to be better at marriage, and how to make sure that we've got some grace in our marriages as well. In the first episode, we talked about how y'all met. We talked about how things went from really good to not so good and pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. We also got to the point where you're saying, okay, we're starting to turn things around. And I want to sort of pick up where we left off. When you got back from that conference, when you got back home, what changed for you? Because Marilyn said she saw some differences, but what changed for you?
Well, I remember I got back at 2 a.m. from the conference. At 5:30 in the morning, Marilyn got up before church to plant plants. And on 3 hours sleep, I got up and walked outside and I said, "Where do you want me to dig?"
To dig?
Yeah.
You were going to work in the garden with her?
Yeah, because she was like, and she looked at me like I was a ghost because I had not helped her at all our entire marriage. So when I was up there and I didn't get up. I mean, her vision for our marriage was every morning we have coffee and breakfast and talk about our day. Then we go to work. I woke up 15 minutes before I had to be at work, showered, threw on clothes, and ran out the door and didn't say a word to her. So when I got up at 5, she was a little bit surprised. And when I said, "Where do you want me to dig? We're getting this thing started today," I think she was probably a little on the confused side.
Is that accurate?
Absolutely. I was like, what in the world? Because he does not like to get up early. And I do and get things done before. And I was in grad school, so I didn't have a lot of time. So just was going to plant flowers. And he came out and helped me, and I couldn't believe it. So
Was that day different? I mean, that's the way the day started. Was the rest of the day different? Did it change sort of who is this guy? Were you skeptical or were you hopeful? Where were you?
I was trying not to be hopeful, and skeptical. But he really was so excited. And so I just was praying that maybe the Lord was working, and he absolutely was. Yeah. And it really was a drastic change. Brad's a little bit of a all or nothing kind of guy.
So did you go from cold water to hot water, or did we get to lukewarm for a little while, and then all of a sudden we felt like it was good?
You know, it really was a drastic change for us. That's not the case for lots of couples, but I do think personality plays into it a little bit. He is kind of an all or nothing guy, so he still is a little bit, and I'm a little more steady. Mm-hmm. We're so different in our personality, so of course that brings self-sacrifice and compromise when you bring that to the table. So we still had a lot to work through, but I began to see that, hey, we're a team rather than two people at odds. It felt like we had moved from fighters to we're on the same team. And that was a huge shift.
I think we think oftentimes in math equations, right? We think that we're going to have a relationship is going to be 100%, right? It's going to be a circle 100%. Well, that can be one person puts in 100 and one puts in 0. It can be one person puts in 70, one puts in 30. It could be 50-50. But in reality, it's got to be 75 and 75 or 95 and 85, right? I mean, in order for it to work, we got to see if we can get closer to 200 rather than getting to 100. I mean, do people feel that way? Do people in this day and age look at marriage that way?
Well, I think when you consider the interest of others above your own, like it says in Scripture. So if I'm more worried about Marilyn than me, I'm more worried about what makes her happy than me happy. I'm more worried about what's important to her that's important to me. Marriage works. When I'm interested in me and getting what I want from her, it doesn't work. So when Marilyn's trying to lay her life down for me and I'm laying down my life for her, marriage works great. When I'm hoping Marilyn will make me more happy, when I'm hoping Marilyn will meet my needs, I'm hoping Marilyn will do these things, it breaks down because God is our sustenance. He's sufficient. And when we're receiving from God and loving one another, it works. Our first year, I wanted to go to games all the time. She didn't. So we're always arguing. I want to go to a game. She doesn't. Are you going out of town again this weekend? Well, I'm fighting to do what? Go to a game. What I want. Marilyn's fighting for what? Stay home.
So you weren't going to classical piano concerts with her. Is that what you're saying?
We did when we dated. I went to Phantom of the Opera during the UK LSU football game.
But see, that's still talking about sports. I mean, even then you're saying, I went and did that for her and I gave up this. There still is a me factor as part of that.
I remember because, we're not a cultural, my brother and I weren't cultural. When we went to Phantom of the Opera, I said, it wasn't a Phantom of the Opera. It was Miss Saigon. So I called Marilyn. I called my brother and I said, I'm not going to the game. I'm going to see Miss Saigon. My brother goes, who's that? Marilyn's aunt? That's my brother. And you're missing the LSU game to see.
Yeah, but there's a helicopter at the end of that musical that just is amazing. Sorry, we'll talk musical theater later on.
Funny.
So
That's impressive.
help me to understand, though, how do we get from this me to we mentality? How do we change? For you, it sounds like it was going to a conference, a convention. The Lord was working on your heart. You were praying about it. You were intentional about it. But if that's not part of where you are, how do we change? How do we get from me to we?
It's a daily battle. It's not just a switch. Okay, all of a sudden, I'm not selfish, I'm selfless. It's a daily battle. And we'll kind of go in and out, but it's remembering, it's pursuing God, allowing God to change you, being more interested in honoring God with your life than interested in other people honoring you by their life. So it is a battle. It's constant repentance, hearing from the Spirit and change. It's intentionality where you're on a consistent daily and weekly basis saying, I'm trying to have a better marriage, trying to love my spouse more effectively. It's not something that all of a sudden it just clicks and it's easy.
Well, here's one thing that I think contributes to the problem that we have is we know that in work and any talent that we have with children, we have to work at it for it to go well. We need to be intentional in all these areas, but we think our marriages should be fine without any work. We just think if there's something wrong, there's a problem, rather than, wait, I need to be intentional with this. God created the institution of marriage. It's a beautiful thing. It's to be held in honor among all. And we think there's a problem if things just don't naturally go well. Isn't that crazy to say it out loud? We realize that doesn't make sense.
Well, my wife's hairdryer broke this morning. She's going to buy a new one. There'll be an owner's manual with a hairdryer. You get married, you get nothing. You get a certificate that says you're married. There's no guide. Well, there is the Bible, but that's a whole nother story.
Yes.
That a lot of people, they get married in a church, and that may be the last time that they spend in that church.
And what you've heard your whole life is, and they lived happily ever after. We watch these movies, we read these books, we have these expectations of it's going to be easy. No, it puts your struggles in high definition.
So we heard how Brad changed. We heard about, the difference coming out. Where do I dig? Right. What about you? Did you change? Were you different? There was skepticism. You admitted that. You were wondering, you were hopeful, but not necessarily, just over the edge. What changed for you?
Well, what changed for me is the fact that God had already showed me I was being so selfish and just thinking about what I wanted. So every day was praying, Lord, show me how to love him well. So I started going to sporting events more. And that first year we did fight over it. It was my goal to keep him off the couch at the end of a workday, because once he turned on ESPN, I'd lost him for the night. So I would try and get him out the door to go on a run or something. If there was a winner and a loser, he's watching it. It doesn't matter what the event is. And every game's an important game. Like he could argue how this is a really important T-ball tournament
right.
that I'm watching right now. And so instead of fighting against that, I started going to games with him. I started asking questions and trying to learn about sports, because if this is important to him, It needs to be important to me.
Right.
It doesn't need to be everything in our life. So he had to shift on that. And his uncle, I mean, before we got married, his uncle wrote us a 10-page letter, and he said lots of these things. It's like he was a prophet. He was like, Brad, sports are too important to you. Marilyn, you're going to need to make sports important to you. But I didn't in that first year. I was mad about it, and I didn't enjoy it.
I remember that one Saturday. It was a beautiful fall day. Got up. I turned on
football, because football days are special days.
I turned on the radio, was listening to one game on the radio, and watched another game on TV, and did that for 10 straight hours.
He didn't leave the couch
on a fall day.
Saturday.
And Marilyn's like, our whole fall day, and you're just, yeah.
This is the perfect day, in my opinion. So I went outside and did my own thing, and so he realized, he was like, you like to walk for
Were
fun?
Sundays bad too? I mean, Saturdays are college football. Sunday, were you doing the same thing with the NFL? I mean, was it the same thing?
There's always something.
No,
on
I
sport.
know. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it wasn't just Kentucky. It wasn't just college. It was whatever was.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, and then staticky baseball on the radio when you're driving somewhere.
Oh,
There's
that's
nothing
outstanding.
worse.
No, wait a second. Be careful now. You're crossing the line. There is something romantic about listening to a baseball game on there. And my background getting in the way, I guess.
But when I had that change, I realized I need to lay down sports for Marilyn. So I would intentionally try not to go to games. Like I would say, I want to go, but we'll do this. So I was trying to do what she wanted to do, and she started trying to do what I wanted to do. And then it started working. So yes, I went to less games, but yes, Marilyn went to more games with us. And it really worked when Marilyn's trying to help me get my way and I'm trying to help her get her way. That's a healthy argument.
Right.
When I'm trying to get my way, she's trying to get her way. That's an unhealthy argument. And when we both kind of shifted toward trying to consider each other, it really took 90% of our fights out.
Did you work less when this happened? Was your law practice not less important, but did it seem to be less pressing on you?
Absolutely, because Marilyn got her rightful place. So I put boundaries on work. So I'll give this much to the law practice, then I will go home. So stuff like bowling leagues in the evening and client development. I mean, there's an unlimited amount of things you can do to try to grow a business, to try to do business better. But I decided I'm going to make Marilyn more important than the law practice. She will get priority over the law practice, such that no longer did she feel the law practice was more important to her. After that, she would say, I'm more important than Brad's law practice. Before that, she would have said, Brad's law practice is way more important than me.
Right. Right. Did other people see it? Did you have other people say, hey, wait a second, what's changed with y'all?
No, because we were new in this town.
So people didn't have a history of knowing what you were all about.
No, it was not. I don't think many people could see, because that
family, did family notice?
Well,
did your sister notice? Did your mom notice?
I wasn't talking to my family about it because, that first year, I really didn't want to throw him under the bus. And I'm pretty loved by my family, and I wanted them to like him. And so I wasn't sharing. I had one friend that I would call that was out of town,
right,
and just have to vent to and share, and she would try and encourage me. But really, so many people are living miserable quietly. From the outside, they look okay, but inside they're dying. And then we're surprised when we see marriages fall apart, but they've been struggling for years in silence on their own. And you end up, you mentioned earlier, ships passing in the night. We were living like that. We were just doing our own things. I'm in graduate school. He was built. So people end up living separate lives under the same roof. And that's not a beautiful marriage.
Yeah. And what people see isn't real. You don't see behind the curtains of people's lives. I mean, you watched us. You think, well, they're a happy couple. Brad's a nice guy. Marilyn's a nice, but you don't see behind the curtains. And that's why a whole lot of marriages may seem fine on the outside, but if you open up the curtains of their life, they're either stagnant, they're complacent, or they're contentious. So, I mean, on the outside, people would have thought we were fine. And that's one of the things on Grace Marriage. It's like, hey, we want to help you get behind your curtains and help you do marriage well, help you enjoy marriage, help you have a blast together, help you connect, show you that God gave you a beautiful gift in marriage, and we want to help you do it well.
So this was still, I mean, your oldest is in their 20s, right? So we're not talking that you started Grace Marriage in the second year of your marriage. I mean, you continued in the law practice. You had a master's degree. When did kids come along, and then how did Grace Marriage come along?
So 3 years into marriage, we had our first daughter.
Okay.
And we had worked with youth at the church for years.
Yeah.
So we would do small groups, we'd do mission
Yeah,
trips.
my wife and I did the same thing.
And
Yeah.
we did it for years. But when we started to have enough kids, it was really kind of problematic to do evening stuff with kids. So we stopped doing youth. But then one of the youth came forward and said, Brad, will you and Marilyn do our premarital counseling instead of our pastors? And will you preach my wedding? And I said, why?
Yeah.
He said, because we want what you have that looks fun. So we did the premarital counseling. It was Brian and Holly Mason. We always know when we got into marriage ministry because it's when they got married.
Oh,
Is that right?
And then another couple came, and then another came, and then
Were you still doing this after you had kids? Were you still working with the youth even after you had kids?
After we did until we had our fourth child, and then it
Yeah.
was just a little much. We did a lot with youth
A
for
little
10
much?
years.
Yes. A lot much.
Yes. And so we really grieved it because we loved working with youth. And then they asked us to do their premarital. And I'm like, if you'll come over after our kids go to bed, that's perfect.
Yeah.
And then that's how it started. And then other couples started asking. And then our church asked us to lead groups. And then we had a wait list and it was growing. And we were doing.
How many people were you doing? How many different couples were you counseling?
we would take 8 couples at a time and do a group. And we had I don't know why God had given us favor with marriage, but we had about a 2-year waiting list to be in the group. So what we'd do is we'd take 8 couples and then we'd finish their 15, 20-week group. Then we'd take the next 8 couples. Just take the next 8
Were
off
these
the list.
couples already married or were they dating?
Yeah.
Or where,
Well,
how
we
far
did
along?
premarital and we were doing marriage.
So you
groups.
had both.
We had both going on. And then we were, Brad and I were a little bit of crisis counseling.
Right.
But
Were you charging people for doing this or
No.
just it was
No,
just
just
gratis?
It was just, I love helping people in marriage. I mean, and so does Marilyn. And it was just like, we love doing it. So
Yeah.
I would do it some at the office. I do it some at church. And then I was ordained lay pastor of marriage at our church because I was so involved in the marriage space. And then when I got ordained as pastor, I saw that our church did premarital counseling and crisis counseling, but we had nothing for the
In
marriage.
between was not there.
And I thought, wow, that's a problem. So the only thing that was
That's
one-
kind of like a headstone that has the birth date and has the death date, but the dash in between isn't there, right? I mean, it's just, it doesn't exist.
yeah.
Huh.
So I thought, wow, what an ineffective approach to marriage ministry. We'll get you ready. And then if you ever hate each other, call us.
It's too late.
I know.
I mean, for many people at that point, they've
is.
washed their hands and walked away.
And that doesn't help.
Or that's a
people.
last ditch thing,
That
right?
doesn't disciple, that doesn't shepherd. It just made a lot more sense to create a process that couples grow, they enjoy each other more, they connect more, and they grow throughout the years, further and further away from crisis, more and more toward thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And then it hit me, every church in America needs an ongoing discipleship, shepherding process to help marriage. You can't leave a space empty
Right.
and expect it to go well.
Right.
And then it kind of clicked why marriage has declined so much. It's largely because we're not teaching people how to do it well.
So did Grace Marriage start then, or did you guys ruminate on this for a little while and say, did you look at it and say, there's an economic model there that we can make this work? Or did you start to say, I mean, because you can't go from helping people and giving it away all the time to saying, now we're going to start charging for it.
But
So how did you make that transition?
I was still in the law, and I'd been in strategic coach business coaching. And their model was once every 90 days, get out of your business and work on your business. So our law practice had gone well, but it's very complex. I had about 200 active cases. I'm part owner of the firm. So you've got HR, you've got marketing, it was overwhelming. So I decided to try strategic coach to see if it would help. And it did. It helped manage the firm better. It helped delegate better, empower better. And over time, the law practice grew, but my work hours went down because I was managing it well with their help. And I thought, why wouldn't that work in marriage? What if couples once every 90 days got out of their marriage and worked on their marriage? They planned their quarter together. They celebrated wins. They addressed issues. They grew in knowledge and expertise. So in 2012, I called our lead pastor and I said, do you care if I just put together a pilot group, draft some curriculum? A very good friend of mine, Jeremy Bennett, did all the graphics for it. And we did a test group. And it worked. They all loved it. 12 years later, that group's still together. Grace Marriage didn't exist. We just decided to try this.
Right.
And then we tried it in our church. And we were a church about 200, 250 at the time. 54 couples came forward. We only had...
To say they wanted to do this?
Yes. We only had 20 photocopy sheets for signups. But
You had
54 couples... Just as would anybody like a better marriage? Would anybody like to be closer to one another? Would anybody enjoy one another? If so, come on, we're going to do this.
Did you mention this? Was this mentioned from the pulpit? Did this come out in a newsletter? I mean, how did you even put it out there?
Jameis just said, jump up on the pulpit and you can just share what we've done as a group and see if anybody wants to do something similar. And then it hit me. every church in America needs to be teaching people to do marriage and helping them navigate the challenges of life together and stay close. Why do we have youth ministry and children ministry and no marriage ministry? It made no sense. And I felt a clear call from the Lord to leave the law practice, to spend the rest of our lives helping people change the way they do marriage and helping churches change the way they do marriage.
Did you see this coming?
I did.
Did you really?
Well, we had 5 kids.
You probably
at
didn't
this
see it in
point.
the first year of your marriage.
No. I did not. But as this was culminating, I mean, the Lord really took us into marriage ministry when these kids asked us to do their premarital, and we had been doing this for quite some time. And then the interest that we had from our church, and then other churches started asking. So this marriage ministry is growing while he's practicing law, and we have these 5 kids, and I could see this is where the Lord is leading us, is into full-time marriage ministry.
Scared? I mean, was it scary?
Well, he went on a mission trip with a couple of our kids. I stayed home with a baby, and he came home from that trip, and he said, I feel like we need to do this full-time. And I said, absolutely, we do. I just had a peace about it. I knew this is what the Lord's calling us to, so I was not
Was that the first time
scared.
you'd talked about doing it full-time? I mean, had you sort of kicked it around a little bit, saying
We might have
we're in a
kicked
transition?
It kicked it around a little, like, man, how do we, this is growing. We really want to help marriages. So I knew that we both had a heart for this. But when he went away, I think it was the most scary for Brad, because he's kind of the finance guy, the budget guy.
I got cold feet. So it's like, I learned it's easy to get to the edge of the high dive. You know, it's all exciting. And then you look down, you're like, oh my goodness. And
Wait
I'm
a second,
thinking,
that's 3 meters down.
I've got 5 kids. None of them started college. I'm leaving my career.
Yeah.
Have no clue what's ahead. Am I risking my whole family just to do what I want to do? You know, so that all this.
So you're wondering, am I being selfish again?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember telling Marilyn, she said, Brad, would you please quit looking back and wasting our energy? God has made it clear what you're called to do. If you need to stick in the side of the yard to make yourself feel better, let's do it. But you need to do this. Go. Marilyn, I was at a coffee shop in Nicaragua sitting there, and I just felt like need to do this full time.
Right.
And I came back and told Marilyn, and Marilyn's like, absolutely. Let's do this. Now, she didn't know she was going to have to be involved.
I did not. I'm like, I will hold down the fort. I'll help you with the curriculum and the materials. And he's the extrovert. I'm the introvert. And so for a while, it worked like that. Had I known that I would be a part of it, I would not have had that same piece.
Right.
But God has provided, like Jeremy Bennett, who did all the graphics and laid all the material out. By God's kindness, he jumped off the diving board with me, and it's an operation. I've done the vision and a lot of the content stuff. So it has been a wild ride, but God is starting to move to change the way people do marriage, so that prioritization and intentionality and investment are becoming more common. And church after church is starting to fill that marriage space that they've left void for decades.
Well, there's no question that God has been at work not only in your marriage, but also in Grace and in Grace Marriage as well. And we're going to talk about in the next episode how I came into this equation and how somebody from a different state who didn't know anything about the two of y'all is now sitting around the table doing the Grace Marriage podcast. Because again, you wonder about God's fingerprints being on things. There is no question that is all about it. And that's what we're about, is making sure you understand where to look for God's fingerprints on your marriage so that you can make it what he would want it to be as well. And we'll do that coming up next as we come back one more time for another episode of the Grace Marriage Podcast.
Thank you for joining us on the Grace Marriage Podcast. We really hope you're feeling inspired to take intentional steps to grow in your marriage.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us spread the message of grace and reach even more couples.
And if you have a moment, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps others discover the podcast.
To learn more about how you can grow in your marriage, visit us at gracemarriage.com. Keep building stronger, grace-filled marriages.
We'll see you next week on the Grace Marriage Podcast. Until then, keep growing in grace.